Are you a raver?
Do I look like a raver?
I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Dancing for like 4 or 5 hours of a gig, you could generate about 800 kilowatt hours of thermal energy. So that's a lot of energy.
Right, so shall we give it a taste? And it's my favourite.
We're really talking to the plants, and they're telling us how happy they are.
It can fly, but it can also float on water.
The bots kick off with some swift striking.
Oh my God, that came by quick.
It's all about augmented reality.
Useful, then. It's useful.
I scroll through the options with my finger here. Solar system, let's give that one a go. Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
We've got to consider all of these things if we're going to avoid an apocalyptic fate.
But also excited.
The police have found us. I can't believe I'm now wanting to run away from the police. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Your Tech Update. Click Saturday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC World News. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our top stories. An American journalist arrested in Russia on spying charges pleads not guilty after appearing in court.
Stairs after being scared by shooting in the street and was shot in the chest. Her mother was in court as her killer was found guilty.
Yes. Cheryl, how are you feeling?
Ecstatic.
She was also injured when 34-year-old Thomas Cashman opened fire. Police said what he did was abhorrent. He will be sentenced next week. Also on the programme tonight, we report on trials of a revolutionary new blood test which could save thousands like this man from having unnecessary chemotherapy every year. The government's new plans to reduce carbon emissions to net zero come in for heavy criticism from environmental campaigners saying they don't go far enough. A standing ovation for King Charles as he becomes the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. And Stray is one of the top tips to win big tonight at Bafta's awards for the British gaming industry.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, under the lights of Stamford Bridge, a chance for Chelsea to join Arsenal in the Women's Champions League semi-finals. They're 1-0 up after the first leg against holders Lyon.
Good evening. A man has been found guilty of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her home in Liverpool last summer. Thomas Cashman fired shots through the family's front door while chasing another man through the streets. The 34-year-old was also found guilty of wounding Olivia's mother in the attack and the attempted murder of a convicted drugs dealer. Police said that Olivia's death should not be in vain, and they hope that today's verdict will deter others from using guns on the streets. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz reports from Manchester Crown Court.
I just want to know what I've done, that's all. All I want to know is what I'm arrested for.
His own barrister called him one of the most hated people in the country.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder and a suspicion of attempt murder twice.
This is Thomas Cashman, the man who shot a 9-year-old girl dead.
I ain't resisting.
The police caught him after a huge manhunt. He'd used 2 guns, hell-bent on murder, but his plan went wrong. Last August, Cashman was lying in wait in this Liverpool street. The drugs dealer was intent on executing another dealer called Joseph Nee. As Nee walked along the road, Cashman caught up with him. He opened fire. He kept shooting at his target. But then his gun jammed. Nee ran for his life. He saw the light from an open doorway and ran towards it. Cashman shot again as Nee barged in. The bullet went through the door. It hit 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in the chest. Terrified by the sound of gunfire, the little girl had left her bed to find her mum. Cheryl Corbell was herself shot as she tried to keep Cashman out. Today she was in court to hear the guilty verdicts.
Yes!
Cheryl, how are you feeling?
Ecstatic.
The murder made national headlines. The shooting of a child cited as a real low, but not a new low. Exactly 15 years earlier, 11-year-old Rhys Jones was also shot dead in Liverpool. Olivia's murder carried the sense of history repeating itself. The shooting provoked a strong reaction within this community. Information flowed into the police in a volume detectives say they haven't experienced before. And they say some of those they'd expected to put up a wall of silence chose to speak out.
What we saw with this particular crime, with Olivia's murder, is people were talking about a line being crossed. Almost for those involved in crime, as though there is an acceptable level where you don't talk normally, that grass culture being embedded. What we saw with this crime is that lots and lots of people on both sides of that criminal line were wanting to come forward and speak to us.
But until he was caught, Thomas Cashman was still terrorising some within the community.
He was causing that fear and that intimidation and putting people off. The investigation has shown that once he was charged, people felt more confident and comfortable to come forwards.
The number of guns being fired on Merseyside has fallen significantly over the last decade, though last year there were 5 deaths in as many months, and cases like Olivia's highlight the risk of any bullet being fired.
I don't know how many people were harmed as a result of me putting firearms on the street, but no doubt people were harmed, and it's something I massively regret.
Sicarius McGrath was part of an organised crime gang in Liverpool, jailed for violence and gun offences. Now rehabilitated, he's started to work with gang members to turn their lives around.
Any life is unfortunate if it's lost to any type of crime or any type of violence, but you know, the fact that it's an innocent child, you know, in their own home or going about the business makes it much worse, and I believe there's many more incidents to come like that.
The jailing of Thomas Cashman may bring some small comfort to Olivia's family.
I'm on it as well.
But of course it can't bring her back. Her childhood has been cruelly and senselessly snatched away. That can never be repaired. I was inside courtroom number 1 here when those verdicts were returned. Thomas Cashman wiped away tears as he was convicted. His family shouted that they'd appeal. Olivia's family remained dignified throughout. They hugged detectives who'd run this investigation, and those police officers themselves became emotional. And they said afterwards that they wanted to pay tribute to a key witness, a woman who we can't identify, her identity protected by court order. But she's a woman who had a relationship with Thomas Cashman, and she was brave enough to come forwards to detectives and tell them that he'd confessed to her on the night of the shooting. That was a key moment in this trial. We'll be back here at Manchester Crown Court on Monday. That is when Thomas Cashman will be sentenced.
Judith Moritz, thank you. A blood test that can detect traces of cancer cells could spare thousands of bowel cancer patients from having to go through unnecessary chemotherapy every year. A major trial is being carried out in the UK involving 1,600 people. Many patients with stage 3 bowel cancer, which means it's spread to the lymph nodes, will be cured by surgery alone. But until now, doctors haven't been able to know for sure which ones, so patients are offered chemo just in case. This blood test could change all that. In the UK, bowel cancer is the second biggest cancer killer. Nearly 43,000 people are diagnosed with it every year. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, reports.
The C word is a big word to live with.
It's a year since Ben Cook was diagnosed with bowel cancer.
I haven't taken a single day off work, which has been incredible.
After successful surgery, patients like Ben are usually offered intravenous chemotherapy to mop up any cancer cells that might be remaining. But a new type of blood test showed he was cancer-free.
Right, what should we do? A big, enormous Chelsea blow dryer.
So Ben, who runs this hair salon in Chelsea, was spared the toxic side effects which can include nerve damage to the hands and feet.
Work for me is my therapy as such. Like, I love going to work. I love my job. I'm very lucky to do what I do. And if I'd have had the intravenous, I'd feel like I wouldn't have been able to have carried on. But the fact that I didn't have any tingling or anything in my hands has just been an absolute blessing.
Take a deep breath in, sharp scratch.
So how can a blood test tell if a patient like Ben is free of cancer? It looks for tiny fragments of tumour DNA circulating in the bloodstream. If there's none present, there's a low risk the cancer will return. These blood tests, or liquid biopsies, are part of a revolution in the diagnosis and monitoring of cancer. They're being trialled in the UK across lung, breast, as well as bowel cancer, and can detect minute fragments of tumour DNA months, even years before they'd show up on a scan. Ben has regular checkups at the Royal Marsden, which is leading a trial of the blood test across dozens of hospitals.
Your cancer was diagnosed in the cecum, in the right colon.
The results could transform the way thousands of bowel cancer patients are treated in the UK every year.
I hope through this trial that we generate the evidence to show that this technology, liquid biopsies, can be used to spare patients with stage 3 bowel cancer unnecessary chemotherapy after their bowel cancer surgery, because they don't need it.
Artist Suzanne Winter had the blood test done privately and was also spared chemotherapy following her bowel cancer surgery.
I just feel incredibly lucky. I know how toxic it is. I know that I would feel terrible, and also your whole everything is you're getting ready for it. You're psyching yourself up for it. So to suddenly hear that you aren't going to need it is just unbelievable.
Chemotherapy still has a vital role in treating cancer, but if blood test trials are successful, it will mean a brighter future for thousands of patients every year, as well as saving the NHS money. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Environmental groups have criticised the government's new plan to cut emissions, saying it does not do enough to achieve net zero. The government's plan has been updated after the High Court ruled that Downing Street's existing strategy wasn't sufficient to reach the target of net zero emissions by 2050. Ministers say the new plan, called Powering Up Britain, will make a big difference. Critics are not convinced. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, has been looking at the detail.
The Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero was channeling his inner Churchill as he announced his new plan.
Today, with Putin weaponising energy across Europe, our energy security has never been more critical.
The plan is supposed to show how the government will cut emissions after it lost a legal challenge by activists last summer. Mr. Shapps has rebranded it to be about energy security.
I think it's the flip side of the same coin. So as you get to more renewables, including nuclear, you actually do decarbonise the whole energy economy. So it's really two parts of the same thing.
But does today's plan go far enough? In the run-up to the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow 2 years ago, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson boasted of how the UK would make world-beating carbon reductions. The problem is the cuts detailed in today's report fall short of that target.
There are some weasel words. They don't say they're going to meet the target they set out with great fanfare at COP26. They said they were going to cut their emissions, UK emissions, by 68% by 2030 compared to 1990. All the document can say is they'll make some progress towards it.
The government accepted today that it hadn't accounted for all the cuts required, but said it would meet its commitment. We will exceed, not fall short, it said. So how will it do it? I've seen firsthand the renewables revolution the government says will help deliver low-carbon power for the UK. And the rocks below the North Sea will be used to store carbon dioxide captured using technologies the government will help fund. There'll be more solar too, and cash for hydrogen production, and a lot more of this, nuclear power. So what will this mean for you? It's amazing how much difference good insulation can make.
In monetary terms, it saved 40% of our gas on the heating, and it made a really big difference to the comfort of the house as well.
Today's plan has some new cash for energy efficiency, for heat pumps and for electric vehicle chargers, but not enough, says the Green Party.
Well, the greenest thing about this document is the fact that it is full of recycled ideas, sometimes from literally years ago. This is a document that completely fails to rise to the challenge of this moment.
Mr Shapps claims his new plan will drive down emissions and make sure the UK isn't dependent on autocrats like President Putin for its energy. And he says it will also deliver us all the lowest wholesale electricity prices in Europe. But don't hold your breath. He admits it will take a while before the new measures lower our bills. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News, Uxbridge.
The police watchdog has referred to the Crown Prosecution Service the case of an unarmed black man who was shot dead by an officer. Chris Cabba, who was 24, was killed by a Met police officer in September last year. The police marksman who fired the fatal shot was suspended. John Donnison is at New Scotland Yard. John.
Well, Sophie, another difficult day for the Metropolitan Police at a time when they've been facing criticism on a range of issues. Chris Cabba was a young black man, a father-to-be, and he was shot dead through the windscreen of a car he was in that had been made to stop by police in Streatham in South London. He was unarmed. Now, the officer who fired the fatal shot was, as you say, suspended from duty, and the Independent Office for Police Conduct launched an investigation. Well, what we learned today was that investigation has been referred on to the Crown Prosecution Service. Amanda Rowe, who's the director of the IOPC, she said that during the investigation, the officer was advised that they were under criminal investigation for murder, and it was now up to the CPS to decide whether to prosecute. She did say, though, that it didn't necessarily follow that criminal charges would come. Chris Cabba's family told the BBC that they welcomed the decision, and they said that 7 years after their son's death, they were now one step closer to receiving justice. Sophie.
John, thank you. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his party would freeze council tax in England if it were in government. Sir Keir made the promise while launching the party's local election campaign. 230 councils across England will hold elections on the 4th of May. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has been speaking to Sir Keir in Swindon and sent this report.
The leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer.
Labour's high in the opinion polls, but May's local elections will be a proper ballot box test of the party's support, strategy and leader.
At the heart of these elections is a really simple question. Do you believe that Britain deserves better?
Yes! The setting for today's Labour launch signalled ambition, confidence. Swindon currently has a Tory-run council and 2 Conservative MPs. Labour hopes its campaign focus on the cost of living will be a tempting sell to voters.
Trying to find money to cope with everything is near on impossible.
Gas and electricity prices,
I guess that still impacts
rental properties.
We need to get back to a situation where we Swindonians are proud of our town.
After kicking off his campaign, it was down to some door knocking. What does a good result look like for you?
They're very important elections for us. As we measure our progress from 2019 into the next general election. Obviously, we want to win as many seats as possible. We're here in Swindon, which is very, very important to us.
You think you can take it?
I hope so, and we've got a positive case.
Labour said they would freeze council tax in England this year if the party was in government now. So it's a fairly meaningless promise, isn't it?
It's not theoretical in this sense, because the money we would use, the windfall tax that hasn't been collected, £10 billion, is on the table. The government's choosing not to use it. The government could adopt this policy. It's adopting quite a lot of our policy at the moment. Could adopt this, we'd vote for it, and it could happen.
Keir Starmer insists Labour is now a changed party, ready for power. The local election results in May will give a sense of whether voters agree. Ben Wright, BBC News, Swindon.
The Commons Standards Committee has said that the former SNP MP Margaret Ferrier should be suspended for 30 days for breaking COVID laws. Ms Ferrier admitted putting people at risk after speaking in a debate at Westminster and travelling by train while she was infected with coronavirus in September 2020. Her suspension would almost certainly trigger a by-election in her Rutherglen and Hamilton West seat, which she represents as an independent, a key target for Labour. Now the time is almost 6:20. Our top story this evening. A man is found guilty of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool after he chased a convicted drug dealer who'd run into her home. And coming up, we'll meet the community staying connected by funding its own bus service.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, the tournament where thousands turn up to just watch the teams train and kit launches are like trophy celebrations. The IPL brings its frenzied franchise cricket back for a 16th edition.
King Charles has been given a standing ovation as he became the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. He delivered his speech mostly in German and spoke of a special bond between the UK and Germany, saying he hoped to renew the pledge of friendship between the two nations. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports from Berlin.
It's often said that monarchs are good at projecting soft power. Well, at the German Federal Parliament, the Bundestag, warm in its greeting for the first address by a British monarch, King Charles delivered a speech with some notably hard edges.
Von der Reaktion Deutschlands.
He delivered most of it in German. He talked of the successful reconciliation of Britain and Germany since the end of the Second World War. Then he turned to Ukraine.
Habe ist die Geißel des Krieges zurück in Europa.
The scourge of war is back in Europe. The unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has inflicted the most unimaginable suffering on so many innocent people. Countless lives have been destroyed. Freedom and human dignity have been trampled in the most brutal way.
The speech lasted nearly 24 minutes. It was wide-ranging, at times humorous. It pledged renewed friendship, and it was well received. It was the speech of a constitutional, non-political monarch, drafted and approved by the British government. Yet in the choice of language, there was perhaps rather less of the detachment that we've been accustomed to, and perhaps it was that much more powerful for it.
Has it been bad, bombing shit?
From the Bundestag, the King went to a refugee centre for Ukrainians. There was a game of table football. Refugees won, King nil. It was a reminder that Germany has accommodated more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine. In a speech last night, the King praised the country's generosity of spirit. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Berlin.
A criminal investigation has been launched against a meat supplier which is accused of falsely labelling foreign pork as British. The National Food Crime Unit is also looking into claims that the firm, that can't be named for legal reasons, also mixed rotten pork with fresh meat. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson is with me now. Tell us more.
This is serious, Sophie. This story of alleged widespread food fraud was first revealed by the trade publication Farmers Weekly. It claims that at least up until the end of 2020, a supplier had been selling industrial quantities of mislabelled pork. It had spoken to a number of former employees who also claimed rotten pork was sometimes mixed in with fresh produce for further processing. Meat was allegedly sometimes thawed out on the factory floor. Paperwork was falsified to cover the tracks. It was one big fiddle, a source told them. Now, the meat was then basically sold on to manufacturers who used it in products like ready meals, quiches, and sandwiches, and they may have ended up in many of the UK supermarkets. Farmers Weekly said that schools, hospitals, care homes and prisons were also indirectly affected. Now, as you say, the supplier can't be named because this criminal investigation is underway. The chief executive of the Food Standards Agency said tonight that based on the investigation to date, there is no indication that food is unsafe or there is an increased risk to consumers. But this is a key investigation. In fact, it's the most significant one since the horse meat scandal, which rocked the food industry 10 years ago, when horse meat was discovered in beef products.
Emma Simpson, thank you. A look now at some other stories making the news today. And 3 people have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder after a father and son were shot dead in nearby villages in Cambridgeshire. A 27-year-old man and 33-year-old woman have been arrested near Cambridge and a 66-year-old on the M5 near Worcester. Police say the incident appeared to be a familial issue. The government says a rise in the state pension age to 68 won't be brought forward just yet. Mel Stride, the Work and Pension Secretary, said the time was not right to make the change. A decision is now expected in 2026 after the next general election. And one of the UK's longest-serving prisoners, Charles Bronson, has lost his latest bid to be freed from jail. Bronson, who's now 70, has spent most of the past 48 years behind bars after initially being jailed for an armed robbery. The parole board said he had a history of persistent rule-breaking. A group of MPs say more funding and more ambition is needed if the government is to deliver on its national bus strategy in England, with the bus sector in a tough spot and passenger numbers outside of London in decline for decades. But the government says it has provided the largest investment in buses in a generation, with £3 billion committed this Parliament. Alex Forsyth has been to Cumbria to explore the particular challenges facing a rural community where the car is still king.
On a rainy afternoon in Cumbria, I met schoolteacher Sam as she finished work.
Hello, Sam. Hiya.
Like many who live here, Sam's totally dependent on her car to get around.
It's really hard for people who haven't got cars. There's a train which takes about 30-40 minutes to walk to, which is fine, but that's it. That's pretty much our only public transport.
She lives in Broughton-in-Furness, a rural town where the nearest station's a couple of miles away and there are just 2 buses a week.
Hi, Joe.
Hiya. Hello. For Sam's 16-year-old son, Joe, who's currently looking at college options, the lack of transport is having an impact on the choices he's making.
It's challenging because I have to decide on whether I want to do the travelling, whether it's worth it.
Does affect their choices when they're choosing about what course they want to do. It's fairly easy if you want to do A-levels, there's a bus that goes to the sixth form of a school. But if you want to do a more vocational course, then it involves a long journey.
So what would make a difference?
Buses, really.
Cumbria's vast nature is what makes it attractive, but also means it's not commercially viable to run frequent buses everywhere. The county council stopped subsidising them 9 years ago, and they recently missed out on a bid.
Many rural communities. The government has put money into buses, supporting them through the pandemic, keeping fares down, and some councils have funding for improvements. But when it comes to unlocking economic growth and really spreading opportunity, finding transport solutions is key.
Morning, everyone.
Morning. This community has stepped up to provide its own, forming a charity to raise funds to keep this South Lakeland bus service going. It's vital for those who use it, like Joy and Lynn.
It keeps the villages connected, and we all become friends, and it's just a wonderful thing.
As people get older, they can't drive, they have to give up the cars, and then they stay in, but this bus gives them another life.
There are other community buses like this and car clubs. The council's got a transport plan and has been given funding to trial on-demand minibuses.
Thank you.
But it still feels like a long road to a truly connected county. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Cumbria.
And finally, to the Bafta Games Awards, where Britain's finest are going to be honoured tonight. Our gaming correspondent Stephen Powell has been checking out the runners and riders, and he's on the red carpet now.
Yeah, the games industry doesn't get a chance to enjoy the glitz and the glamour of a red carpet as often as its older siblings, the film and television industry, Sophie. So when they do, they make the most of it. And what's interesting about tonight is the real variety and diversity of games that have been nominated for a famous golden mask. There are 45 games nominated, from a dark fantasy role-playing epic written in part by Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin, to a digital card-collecting game. What a game! And small independent titles, like this one, where players go on adventures as a cat. A sweet one at that. The variety of games nominated shows how diverse the gaming market has become. Despite the economic success of the games industry, worth $4.7 billion to the British economy in sales, more than any other entertainment sector in the UK, when it comes to a wider cultural appreciation, gaming is still lagging behind film and TV. But nights like tonight are changing that. As well as the artists and developers, the actors who either perform with their voices or, in the case of God of War Ragnarok, use motion capture technology to create memorable cultural moments, will be recognised.
I've been around gaming since Pong, so it's to see the worldwide acceptance and celebration of it's fabulous, but it's still a bit surreal.
This game is the most nominated, up for 14 awards, but history tells us not to assume that its star, the Greek god Kratos, will outmuscle the appeal of a small tabby cat come the end of the evening. Stefan Powell, BBC News.
Time now for a look at the weather. Darren Bett is here. Hello.
Hello there, Sophie. Today has been the warmest day of the year so far. Temperatures in Suffolk reached 18 degrees. That was in between all those heavy and at times thundery showers. Those are easing away across England and Wales quite quickly, but only because this area of low pressure is moving in. This is Storm Mattis, and this has been named by the French Met Service, where the impacts will be greater and the winds will be stronger. But we are going to see wet and windy weather driving in across many parts of England and Wales. Strongest winds along the southern coast, gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour. And for a while into the night, the rain could be quite heavy before it begins to ease off a bit later on. Further north, the showers do eventually fade away from Scotland and Northern Ireland. Lowest temperatures will be in the northeast of Scotland, around about 2 or 3 degrees or so. Heading into tomorrow, we've got more wet weather in the south. It may well actually turn into heavy thundery showers if we get a little bit of sunshine. Wet weather in particular over the southwest of England. Further north with some sunshine, there could be some sharp showers developing, but we've got an easterly wind bringing in more cloud to eastern Scotland, into northeast England, into the Midlands. Result of all that means it's going to be a bit cooler than today. And as we head into the weekend, those temperatures continue to just fall away just a little bit. And as we head into Sunday, this is where we've got the drier weather and there'll be more in the way of sunshine. But for Saturday, there's still a lot of cloud coming in. And there's some rain, especially across Northern Ireland, Wales, parts of southern England. All this cloud is coming in from the North Sea. Again, it's quite low cloud. Could be a bit of drizzle in there. And it's going to be cold in eastern Scotland and the northeast of England. Temperatures maybe no higher than 7 or 8 degrees. Elsewhere, maybe around 10 or 11 or so. Second half of the weekend, things look a little bit different. We've got drier air this time coming in from the North Sea. The winds will be lighter. There'll be more sunshine around, away from that band of cloud across some western areas. But we've still got those temperatures on the low side, typically 10 or 11 Celsius. Sophie.
Darren, thank you very much. And that is it from us. Now on BBC One, it is time for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Sports Day with me, Hugh Ferris.